What is happening? You are listening to The Brown Perspective. So today I want to talk a bit about what's been going on in Colombia in the last week. As of now, there's 24 protesters that have been killed. There's been protests for about a week because of a proposed tax hike, essentially on middle class and lower class people. Now, the president has since withdrawn the proposal, but the protests have continued. And we're going to get a bit into the militarized police, the response, the heavy-handed response. And today we have someone that can give us a personal insight into what's going on, because our very own Eduardo is from Colombia. So break it down for me. What's going on?
Well, it's so much going on, and just in some ways, this is a continuation a lot of lot of the organizing that was happening in Colombia, but other parts of Latin America like Chile. But specifically in Colombia, I think there had been a lot of protests. One, because a lot of indigenous and progressive community organizers have been killed, and most of them had been killed by former guerrilla members, FARC members, who, under the previous president, President Santos, he negotiated a peace agreement, which was very controversial, probably very imperfect, but it finally finished 50 years of civil war and fighting. But the new administration, that of Ivan Duque, was never committed to it, and he is very much an ally of Álvaro Uribe, who was the president before Duque, who is credited with bringing the FARC into control, but a lot of his methods and how he used the state to spy on political opponents, and a lot of militaries who were killing innocent people in order to get credit for killing guerrillas. So, anyways, so this is the coming together of what was happening then. Now you have a pandemic. The government had to use a lot of funds to respond to the pandemic. You have an economy that's very informal, people who are suffering, young people that since before the pandemic could not find a job. Like I have relatives in Colombia who are very smart, very dedicated, who went to university, but unfortunately they haven't been able to get a job because there's no opportunities. So you combine all of that, and then the government proposed the tax hikes, which, as you mentioned, really it was unfair. It sort of all of it went to basically the a very meager middle class, and the consumers, and the rich obviously did not pay as much or as much as they could. So anyway, that was kind of what ignited the protests. And now that the protests have gone, now unfortunately you have had a lot of the police response has been problematic, and as well as some of the vandalisms that you've seen as a result, usually at night after the peaceful protests have happened. So not too unsimilar to what happened here in the United States back in the summer of 2020.
As it says here, it would disproportionately impact the middle and working classes and escalate inequality in the country's already pandemic hit economy. And
Hmm.
so this is the straw that broke the camel's back, because
Correct.
even though President Ivan Duque withdrew the proposal, now the protests have kept going, and now they're spreading into more generalized protests against inequality, against healthcare, unemployment, which says here is unemployment is at 16% as well.
Mm.
And so it just seems like overall the last few years have not gone well. You were mentioning,
Environmental issues too,
yeah,
like a lot
environmental
of illegal
issues.
mining and destruction of our precious country.
And by the way, Colombia is the closest ally of the U.S. in the region. That's what I read earlier today. I've always known that they've been close, but
Yeah.
didn't know it was the closest ally. And so this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? There's been some collaboration throughout the years between the U.S. and Colombia. The U.S. generally does support this current government, and even though I'm not well versed in Colombian politics, I know that we back this government because there's been 24 protesters that have been killed, and based
Mm.
on how the media works in the United States, if it's a country that we're friendly with, then there's very little coverage. If it's a country that we're not friendly with, then it's plastered all over the news. And I didn't hear about this until earlier this week, and I heard it on Twitter, where I follow a lot of progressive journalists, and it was one of them that actually brought this up, and they showed the video, and I was like, what is going on in Colombia? And even then I looked to see what was going on in the mainstream media, and silence. So this is how we treat these type of humanitarian issues, of human rights issues, when it's from a country that we support.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me as a Colombian, part of me is kind of my heart fills with joy that there's a lot of people, non-Colombians, who are paying attention and who are showing solidarity by either posting about it or posting the Colombian flag upside down, which is the international sign for help, for assistance. By the way, don't confuse it with the Armenian flag, which is actually very similar. But in any case, I think that, see, I shouldn't have made that joke because I forgot the main point I wanted to make.
About the support and solidarity with the Colombian people.
Yes. So grateful for that. But at the same time, it breaks my heart that it's about these negative images of what's happening now. And also for me, I've been sort of monitoring, and obviously as a Colombian American, I still try to watch Colombian noticias. That's one of the reasons I have an international package where I can see Noticias RCN, Noticias Caracol, where I read Colombian newspapers. I have friends who are actually analyzing the political and economic picture. So, these are issues that I've been following closely. So in some ways, I'm glad that the world is paying attention. But to your point, I don't think I had noticed that very thing about the media, because we are very good allies of the United States, in part because we tend to be a very conservative country. I mean, all the money that came to the country as part of Plan Colombia, I think is what a lot of people credit, the Uribe's ability to sort of sort of weaken the guerrilla and then kind of bring peace and prosperity, which President Santos tried to consolidate with the negotiation of the peace treaty with the FARC. But unfortunately, I guess there weren't a lot of people were not interested in sort of putting the war behind us. So unfortunately, we find ourselves in the type of situation where some of the guerrillas are arming themselves. I think there's also the crisis in Venezuela that has impacted. And again, unfortunately, there's been accusations that it's been Venezuelans who have instigated, or a lot of them who are leading these acts of vandalism. So obviously that feeds out some of the xenophobia that's already present in Colombia and other parts of Latin America. So yeah, so it's the type of situation that is sad, and in some ways, we so far we were so happy about learning more about J. Baldwin, about Sofia Vergara, and I think we were hoping that we had turned the corner, but unfortunately, obviously, there's still some deep issues that we're working through as a society. And I say we because I think this not only impacts people in Colombia, but it impacts me as a Colombian who happens to be an American as well.
Yeah, and take a look at this image here. And it makes sense, actually, why Colombia would be the closest ally, because you guys have borders with all of these other South American countries. And so strategically, it's a great place to have all of these military bases, or to...
We're the gateway. We have always been the gateway of the Americas.
Yeah, and so a lot of the hostility towards Venezuela and that whole incident with Juan Guaido, when we were, I say this in air quotes, sending humanitarian aid to Venezuela, all of that, all that was organized in Colombia, and then you organize that, and then you carry out your operation across the border into Venezuela. But yeah, it again, not surprised to see such a heavy presence from the U.S. there. And
then the other piece is that in that same area is where a lot of the former guerrillas and are operating, because in some respects they are political allies of Venezuela, of a more communist country. So that's the other component of that.
And so you mentioned here something about Venezuelans being blamed for the violence, but right here it also says that President Duque has blamed much of the violence on drug trafficking mafias, taking advantage of the chaos. What do you
Hmm.
think about that when you read something like that?
Well, it's true, because I think some of those drug trafficking mafias previously were worked with the FARC or were controlled by the FARC, and I think that the other fact is that it's not only the FARC, el Ejército de Liberación Nacional, el ELN, is still pretty much active, and sometimes what they do is that they have urban units that help them recruit people, get resources, get funding, and also cause chaos opportunistically when they can. So I think that part of that is true that there's definitely, particularly those who attack the police with Molotov cocktails, that stabbed, that are shooting at police, which then in turn creates a stronger response from the police too. They're certainly in there too. So there's an element of truth to that, but that they only represent a fraction of the people who go out there. So it's very similar to, when the Proud Boys or Antifa would go to these types of manifestations and try to hijack the protests to advance their ideology.
But isn't this in a way also trying to deflect from the real problems, from the legitimate grievances of the population by trying to say that a lot of this is being caused by drug trafficking mafias, that they're the ones that are out there? When I see some of these videos, I see what looks like regular protesters lunging at police officers.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of them are regular people. A lot of them are young people,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
I
young.
think you mentioned I believe the unemployment rate for young people in Colombia is higher than 60%. I think it's like low 20s, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
But it's incredibly high, and they're frustrated, right? And oftentimes they're the ones that are also more idealistic. So there's a lot of college students who have studied, who are informed, who are organized, who are part of the coalition, because there's an entire coalition that formed in order to sort of protest what was happening with the or community organizers and some of the other issues before the pandemic. And I think now is a continuation of that work, and obviously the addressing the disparities that became apparent during the pandemic.
And
So
can,
there is
yeah.
there is some political organization, but unfortunately there are those criminal elements and those more radical elements that are looking to destabilize the the country, destabilize the government, and also in some ways distract, because I'm sure that while the world is paying attention to our major cities, people are moving stuff around in and out of Colombia.
And when I look at the police here, it looks a lot similar. The police look a lot similar to the militarized police that we have seen in some of the major cities here in the US. I know that to some degree, the United States trains the Colombian military, the police as well. We fund them. To what extent do you know, like, how close?
They work pretty closely, and you're right. I think that was one of the critiques about Plan Colombia, that a lot of the money went towards military to the military, because the military actually is very well equipped and able to do that. And some of that also translated into the police, and in some respects, the police justify their gear and the material because of the protests, because of some of the attacks that they needed to defend against the bombings and all those things that have plagued my beautiful country. But so yeah, so I think that militarization is part of it, um, of the police, and then also, I mean, but the video that I seen on how they went into some neighborhoods just shooting at random and
Mm-hmm.
almost like provoking um, the people there, that was concerning too. Again, and I know there's been reports of people attacking police officers, stabbing them. There was even a group of people that tried to burn some police officers alive. And again, it's kind of those types of situations that just further
Yeah, it just spirals out of control.
yeah, and separates people, and then you get people on opposite sides of the debate blaming the protesters, and then people siding with the police, and all that stuff. So it feels like there's a lot going on. At the same time, I do have to acknowledge that also the majority of them, como dicen, la mayoría son gente buena, and they came out after the protests in Cali, for instance, which was one of the cities that has been more impacted besides Bogota, which is only 4 hours south from where I grew up. People came out, they dressed in white, they sort of criticizing and criticizing those who did the vandalism and cleaning, and sort of showing that the majority of people are good. They're fed up with what's going on. They're fed up with the inequality. They're fed up with the government trying to sort of balance the budget on the backs of Colombians working poor and middle class. But obviously they also don't want to destroy the country, the resources, the bus stops, the police,
Right.
sort of the infrastructure, and more importantly, the image, right? Because this is going to be damaging to the image that Colombia has, and that had so hard work to improve internationally.
A positive note here. Duque has called for a national dialogue in which the government will hear the concerns of the people, including social leaders and political parties, with a tentative date of May 10. So at least this is how you get your government to respond, not necessarily with the violence. I'm not condoning that, but just with sustained protest, sustained pressure, put them on the world stage so that you can shame them into action. It's hard to say what's going to come of this. They're politicians, so they'll find a way to weasel their way out of doing anything significant. They'll probably do some concessions, and then hopefully people go back to their homes and stop protesting. But at least it's a positive sign that they are getting the government to respond. And I know you also wanted to bring some attention to this YouTube channel here that does political satire on La Puya, on Colombia.
That's right, La Puya. Así que if you're looking to better understand what's happening in Colombia and in other parts of Latin America, and if you're looking to continue to improve and learn your Colombianisms and go beyond huevón or parce, this would be a good show to kind of get a sense for what's going on politically and socially in Latin America, in Colombia. So if you play a little bit of this song, and if you can play him, and then I would love for you to put the piece when La Compañera starts talking, because she's also good, and she's kind of the original face for this show.
All right, so this is in Spanish, but we'll translate afterwards. I'll go ahead and play this. Let me know if you want me to skip ahead.
Confundida con la reforma tributaria. Y con razón. Porque el gobierno no solo presentó un mamotreto difícil de entender y que no ha hecho el más mínimo esfuerzo de explicar, sino que nos cree idiotas. Desde mucho antes de presentar el texto final, nos estaba haciendo una campaña de terrorismo emocional que aquí les vamos a narrar. Cuando tu familia te necesitó, fuiste solidario. Cuando tu vecino acudió a ti, fuiste solidario. Cuando tu amigo te pidió ayuda, fuiste solidario. Hoy tu país también necesita de tu solidaridad.
No way. That's how they're trying to condition the people to accept the higher taxes?
And that's how they wanted to, yes.
Wow.
Hey, you can't, I think, what was the political person who said you can't let a crisis go to waste?
Yeah, well, that's what we do. If Colombia was not our friend, you bet that we'd be in there trying to take advantage of this to exploit it and remove the president or do whatever else we wanted to.
Yeah.
All right.
Además, Duque salió a insistir que no era una reforma tributaria, sino que era una ley de solidaridad. Y escúchenlo defenderla.
Esta transformación social sostenible es urgente.
¿Nos sorprende? No nos sorprende. Ya lo había hecho con las dos reformas tributarias anteriores, a las que llamó con los eufemismos ley de financiamiento y ley de crecimiento.
That's what I was going to say, the euphemisms that they're resorting to.
Ay, papito lindo. Eso te lo valen como truco en un ensayo en la Sergio Arboleda, pero con nosotros no vas a jugar así. Súmele a eso que el gobierno estuvo durante meses midiéndonos el aceite, lanzando las propuestas más escandalosas, como el IVA al café.
Todos podemos pagar un poquito más de ese IVA para el café y no nos va a afectar.
So we've already played a minute of this and completely forgot that we just transitioned into Spanish, but we haven't translated any of this.
Yes, and I think it's hard to translate, but basically what he just did is kind of using a very creative style that I think at least Colombians love and appreciate, like very smart ass, making fun, double puns. He's explaining the situation. So once we tee that one up. But anyways, he kind of explained how you saw the way that they're trying to sell it as a way, you need to help your neighbor during the pandemic. We came together during the pandemic. Now we need to do a little bit more. We need to pay a little higher taxes. We need to pay, and the IVA is kind of like the tax on the sales tax that you pay on things. And usually, as in the U.S., food is exempted, but they're trying to tax coffee and eggs and some of los productos de la canasta diaria. So that's one of the reasons why people were so upset. But she is funny.
And there was outrage too, wasn't there? Because one of these government officials said that eggs weren't that expensive to begin with.
And that's the part where she, at the end, she goes like, "Oiga, señor ministro, dígame dónde comprar los huevos tan baratos que la calle está dura."
Okay, and this is let me play her right here.
Juntos.
¿Y por qué se les ocurre meter una reforma en medio de la pandemia y cuando todos estamos jodidos? Lo que pasa es que las finanzas del Estado también están jodidas. Eso pasa por varias razones. Primero, ya veníamos cargando un hueco fiscal de 10 billones de pesos que crearon Duque y Carrasquilla por darles exenciones y regalos a los más ricos en las reformas tributarias pasadas. Segundo, por la pandemia se estima que el gobierno terminó invirtiendo 44.4 billones de pesos solo en 2020 para mejorar la capacidad hospitalaria, atender a las personas más vulnerable, proteger el empleo y revivir la economía. Aunque eso lo hizo a medias y con muchas críticas. Si quieren, vean el video que le hicimos al...
Right. So she's saying that tax cuts for the wealthy and also the inevitable spending that was half-assed but that needed to happen as a result of the pandemic. And then the other point that was mentioned earlier is that essentially this is just a way to try to exploit the pandemic, to try to appeal to people's sense of solidarity and to their altruism, to try to see if they can sneak in higher taxes for all of them. Wow.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think
it's a different dynamic, but a lot of the same kind of...
Well, I think what it's actually I was going to say that it seems a little crude, but I think what might be missing from this tactic is not really the tactic might be okay because the United States does stuff like this all the time, but in order for things like this to work, you need the support of the entire media establishment to just go out there and parrot the same thing and to try to convince and shame people into doing these things. So maybe Colombia just didn't have the media support to try to come out and sell this.
Yeah, and I think fortunately the media is still relatively, I mean, obviously there's a certain the wealthy and the elite own the media outlets, but for the most part they do try to have journalistic integrity and expose issues and problems. So I think in some ways that's probably what prevented them from selling it completely to the rest of the country.
Or it also, just because of the years of hardship, it gets to a point where people become desensitized and they tune out the media because they know that they're not representing their best interest. So even though the media may have tried, it just at a certain point it just doesn't work anymore because people reach a threshold where maybe initially that would have worked. Maybe there's a group of people that are not experiencing the same type of hardship, so it works on them. But if you have more than half of your population or a big percentage of it that is living in poverty, that is facing high unemployment, then those tactics are not going to work. Anyway,
right.
Any last words before we wrap this up?
No, I think thank you all for those of you who are learning about these topics, who have been good friends to Colombians and to the Colombian people. It's sad because, as all of you should know by now, if you don't already have a Colombian friend, you should. I think all of us deserve at least one Colombian friend. But as you know, we're friendly, happy, outgoing people, very giving, and that unfortunately we have lived through a lot of trauma. Where I think what's happening now in some ways is positive, because I think it shows how the entire Colombian society is united to make things better for everyone, not just for their particular socioeconomic group. So I think it's great to see that in some ways this needed to happen in order for us to continue that process of healing, of coming together. And the reality is that there's going to be an election in a little bit over a year. So there will be a new president, and hopefully there will be new leadership. Not only new leadership, but also a more activated civic and social movement to keep those new leaders accountable, and making sure that they're followed through on their promises, and addressing a lot of the problems that are at the root of this of this issue.
Yeah, we'll follow the story as it progresses. Next week we can do a follow-up. All right, so for all you out there, if you like our content, make sure to check us out. We are Brown Perspective. We are on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Nos vemos.
Ciao.